Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the Deathbed Edition. We are now into Song of Myself, passage 14. This is maybe the most Thoreau-like of all of the passages of Song of Myself. Just to remind, we have said that sections 8 through 16 of Song of Myself is the great catalog section, and here we're going to continue to play around with any number of different types of lists from nature and the like. My assumption is you've been with us at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side to find Talks with Walt, the playlist. Hopefully you've messed around with us through the 24 poems of inscriptions, the 19 sections of Starting from Paumanok, and the past 13 sections already of Song of Myself. As we turn now to what some have said is some of the most beautiful and melodic and Thoreau-like, as I said it, nature writing of them all. The wild gander leads his flock through the cool night. Ya honk, he says, and sounds it down to me like an invitation. The pert may suppose it meaningless, but I, listening close, find its purpose and place up there toward the wintry sky. The sharp-hoofed moose of the north, the cat on the house sill, the chickadee, the prairie dog, the litter of the grunting sow as they tug at her teats, the brood of the turkey hen, and she with her half-spread wings. I see in them and myself the same old law. The press of my foot to the earth springs 100 affections. They scorn the best I can do to relate them. I am enamored of growing outdoors, of men that live among cattle or taste of the ocean or woods, of the builders and steerers of ships and the wielders of axes and mauls and the drivers of horses. I can eat and sleep with them week in and week out. What is commonest, cheapest, nearest, easiest is me. Me going in for my chances, spending for vast returns, adorning myself to bestow myself on the first that will take me, not asking the sky to come down to my goodwill, scattering it freely forever. Now, we've given full lectures on Thoreau's Walden. We've given full lectures on most of the essays of Emerson, especially, of course, his classic Nature. And it's clear that we're playing a very similar kind of game here, and it's quite a remarkable game. Notice we begin with more bird references, the wild gander, and the whole notion of that honking. And then notice he even gives us ya honk in italicized, by the way, not italicized in the 1855, but italicized at the end. What will be interesting is when we get to the end of Song of Myself, we're going to remember this in passage 52, because the barbaric yop of the hawk, but it's not italicized in the Deathbed Edition. Here, ya honk is italicized, he says, and it sounds down to me like an invitation. Now we're going to begin with this notion of an invitation, and we're going to end this passage with a kind of an invitation as well. That is to say, he says, the pert, in other words, the senseless to nature, the uninformed, might suppose it meaningless. This sounds so much like Thoreau, but I, listening close, find its purpose and place up there toward the wintry sky. Now in the 55 edition, he wrote this as, but I, listen closer, I find its purpose and place up there toward the November sky. It's interesting the ways, and we're going to ask this question now at 2b, why he edited the way he edited. I'll let you make some decisions. Maybe some would argue he's trying to tighten his language a little bit. The sharp-hoofed moose of the north. Notice we get 7 different animals that are being referenced in this poem. The cat on the house sill, the chickadee, the prairie dog, the litter of the grunting sow as they tug at her teats. It's a wonderful image that obviously he had seen and many of his readers had seen on the farm. The brood of the turkey hen and she with her half-spread wings. And then he says it. I see, not behold, but see here. I see in them and myself the same old law. By the way, notice how many times the word myself, me, get used in this poem. Okay. Notice the same old law. Now here we cannot help but think of his poem Eidolons from Inscriptions. Go back and take a look at that. We can't help but think of Emerson's classic work Nature. But I think most importantly this is a line almost directly out of Walden. Now remember, Walden is published in 1854. 1855 is when this set of lines is published, so it's very, very possible that Whitman had some exposure to Walden as he was working with these lines. And then you've got this two-line stanza that's quite remarkable and very Thoreau-esque. The press of my foot, again, this notion of walking, to the earth springs 100 affections. They scorn the best I can do to relate them. No line is as Thoreau-esque as this line. And to me, in all of Leaves of Grass, this is pure Thoreau here. Notice the very fact that I can walk in the mountains among nature, it will spring, it's a wonderful verb, springs 100 affections. There's so many powerful feelings that Whitman says I feel when I am out in nature walking. They scorn the best I can do to relate them. Now, we've used this term before, but here it's, and we used it so much in our discussion of Walden, translinguistic. It's beyond words what it is that one feels when one is having this powerful connection with nature. Obviously, Emerson did his best to try to give it words. Obviously, Thoreau did his best here. Whitman is trying to do his best. But in the end, they all say the same thing. You can't really put words to something like this. Notice he continues, I am enamored of growing outdoors. In the 55 edition, by the way, outdoors was just one word without the hyphen. Here it's got the hyphen. Now, we're going to come back to this line later when we do the classic Song of the Open Road. There he says, I think heroic deeds were all conceived in the open air, and free poems also. The idea of being outside, of the expansion of space in nature. Of course, it's a very Emersonian idea as well. And then two lines with of men that live among cattle, or taste of the ocean or woods. In other words, people who live in the freedom of the woods or out on the ocean, right? Of the builders and the steerers of ships. We've obviously heard something about this already. And the wielders of axes, we've heard something about that. In malls, we've obviously heard something about it. And the drivers of horses. See, notice how he's starting to sassoon now at the end of all the cataloging that will culminate in passage 16, 15, and 16. He's starting to bring all of this cataloging down to its end. I can eat and sleep with them week in and week out. In other words, I love to be around people who are doing this kind of work. I Hear America Singing is, of course, his inscriptions poem that we'll think about here at 2A as well, or at 3A as well. Notice what he says, though, is I love to imagine that I can work with the best, the strongest, the hardest workers. Notice how this is quite different from the dandy-like poet that had been so regularly the poet of the day, that's going to write about any number of things without actually experiencing them. Whitman is the great poet of experiential learning, and he's playing the game here. He finishes with a very fascinating last set of lines. Notice these last 5 lines. What is commonest? We got, by the way, notice 4 of these. What is commonest, cheapest, nearest, easiest is me. Notice capitalized me here, right? In other words, these things that other people take for granted as silly, as useless, as the Pert will say, meaningless. No, this all has meaning. Just because you don't see it as having meaning doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning. By the way, in the original 55 edition, this line was written with conjunction so that it read like this. What is cheapest and commonest, what is commonest and cheapest and nearest and easiest is me. He edited this out, and we're just paying attention to this now at 2B. He edited this out for a much tighter line. What is commonest, cheapest, nearest, easiest is me. And then the repetition of the word me going in for my chances, spending for vast returns. In other words, I'm willing to take a chance. Now, of course, this is going to be true of Whitman the person and Whitman the poet as he tried to publish Leaves of Grass. Very few people wanted to say anything positive. It's amazing to us today that we read lines like this. We're like, dude, this is some amazing poetry that celebrates the power of the great outdoors. Why wouldn't this be more accepted? And of course, we know answers to that, as we've already seen from some of our earlier studies, because some of this stuff is a little bit controversial. Notice he's saying, like Wordsworth will say in his essay at the beginning of Lyrical Ballads, he's writing for the common, right? For the easiest, the commonest, the cheapest, the nearest, the easiest, right? Adorning myself, notice the repetition of the word myself, to bestow myself on the first that will take me. In other words, we're back to so much of that sentiment that we saw in inscriptions as well as in starting from Pomanak. Will you just give me a chance? Just give me a chance. And you get this sense that Whitman as poet is just wanting desperately to have a reading audience. Of course, other times he will say, I know that I'm going to be read long, long into the future. And our discussions here kind of prove that he was right. Adorning myself to bestow myself on the best that will take me, not asking the sky to come down to my goodwill. Now here's Whitman as philosopher theologian and his comments regarding prayer and the like. Not asking the sky to come down to my goodwill, scattering it freely forever. Now, when we get to passage 48, I find letters from God dropped in the street and I leave them where they are. I know others will follow the final lines of passage 48, which is in many ways Whitman's strongest statement of his theological views. We're going to come back to these lines again. In other words, what does he say? I don't need a certain kind of organized religious experience to experience deity. I just simply need to be in the open air, as he's out of doors, as he says it here, in the open air. It'll be in Song of the Open Road. Okay, well, what's our messages here? Well, nature is very inclusive and it's very instructional, and of course we know this from our study of Emerson and Thoreau, which is why many people will add to the other two great transcendentalists, Walt Whitman, and of course we could put there as well Emily Dickinson, at 2B, the editing choices that he makes and the tightening up the line. You get to decide which one of the two versions you like better. At 3A, well, obviously Thoreau's Walden, but I want to as well mention Emily Dickinson here. I want us to pay attention to the beauty that of these lines as they relate to as well Dickinson and the way she's able to construct such powerful ideas from the simplest of observation. Hope is the thing with feathers. I mean, we've given so many lectures on Dickinson at learnstrong.net. You could go and find those lectures. Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about being outdoors? I mean, we live in a time now where increasingly we're told lots and lots of people your age like to stay indoors playing the video games or looking on your phones or whatever. To what degree do you think maybe a walk outside's not a bad idea? And oh yeah, if you're going to take a walk, you might want to take along leaves of grass and start to read this stuff out of doors. It'll be good for your soul. That's what Whitman says. Thank you.